President William Ruto is asking Gen Z protesters not to burn their country. In what appeared to be a departure from his usually abrasive style, the president seemingly implored protesters to become part of the solution, saying they were sending the "Why do Africans love Traoré?" while Kenyan police are the ones screaming enough. This question is spreading like a spark in the dark. And if you follow African politics, you will understand. This is not a phenomenon. This is a historic turning point. In Burkina Faso, a young president named Traoré has not only rejected the IMF but also rejected fear. He has inspired with strong words, clear actions and above all trust in his people. And in Kenya, one of the most developed countries in West Africa, it is the police, the guardians of order, who are now taking to the streets, refusing to be instruments of an exploitative system. It is no longer just politics. This is a confrontation between two concepts of leadership. One inspiring, one exhausting. Let's get to the facts to see what is really happening in both countries, that is, forcing the continent to choose sides. Kenya, July 2024. Thousands of paramilitary police took to the streets of Nairobi chanting "Enough is enough." Some stripped off their uniforms in front of the cameras, declaring their resignation from their role as the lays of a government that doesn't listen to the people. For the first time in the decades, law enforcement itself was protesting against the system it served. The reasons: inflation had exceeded 20%. The local currency was losing value and IMF loans forced the Kenyan government to cut public spending, cutting police, education and health sector bonuses. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré appeared at a community education fair in Kaya at the same time. No bodyguards, no big stage. He declared, "We don't need loan conditions. We need living conditions." Traoré refused the IMF loan, instead calling on the people to pitch in, and was greeted as a hero. No protests, no police on the streets, just groups of young volunteers repairing schools and offering free classes. What do you believe is making the difference? Policy, leadership, or the trust of the people? To understand, we have to delve into the nature of the two countries and how the two leaders chose such opposite paths. What did Ibrahim Traoré to Africans was not his eloquent speeches or his military uniform, but the feeling that he was one of them. Not born into wealth, not educated in Europe, not following an imported political model. Traoré entered politics with a single weapon, his candor. When he announced his rejection of an IMF loan, the Western media called him reckless. But, in the eyes of the people of Burkina Faso, it was not recklessness. It was the first act in years of someone daring to say no on their behalf. In a continent accustomed to leaders speaking on behalf of foreign countries, a man who stood up for his people was unusual. Traoré did not promise a raise. He did not promise subsidies. He promised to give back land to the farmers, to give back trust to the forgotten. His community talks were not air-conditioned, not broadcast live on glossy television. But he came, sitting on the ground listening to women talk about their lost fields, children without classes, and unemployed youths who wanted to leave the country. When you live in a society where politicians only appear during election season, having a leader willing to walk into the village with the people without cameras, without the script, is unheard of. And the strangest thing, the love for him did not come only from Burkina Faso. People in Mali, Senegal, even Nigeria, who were tired of the repetitive political system, all started calling him by names like son of the mainland, the second Thomas Sankara, or simply the one who speaks for us. Have you ever loved a leader not because of his promises but because of his timely silence and his willingness to do the difficult thing? If someone dared to say frankly, "We are not poor, we have just lost our trust," would you stand by them? But while Traoré rebuilt his country with faith, another country, Kenya, responded to the crisis in the complete opposite direction. In Kenya, when the police force began to protest, it was not simply a strike for rights. It was a cry from the heart of the system. They were not the underprivileged poor farmers or unemployed. They were symbols of state power. But in the cycle of debt, spending cuts, and rising living costs, the very people who once upheld the law became victims. Between 2021 and 2024, Kenya borrowed more than $9 billion from the IMF and global financial institutions. The conditions that came with it, as always, were austerity, cuts to public budgets, increases in VAT, and reductions in education and health subsidies. The police force was streamlined. Its allowances were lost, and salaries were delayed by up to 3 months in many areas. The result, the police no longer trusted the government. The already skeptical people now distrusted it even more. The divide between citizens, police, and government is becoming clear. In a video that has gone viral on Kenyan social media, a police officer removes his badge in front of the camera saying, "I did not betray my country. I just do not want to continue serving a system that no longer has humanity." This event has shaken the Kenyan middle class not because of social unrest but because it has exposed the truth that the government does not want to talk about. The system is broken from within, while Traoré inspired people to contribute. In Kenya, it is the custodians of order who are the first to refuse to continue playing the role of silent soldiers. What do you think happens when the security forces, the pillars of the system, start to doubt the justice they are protecting? Can a country survive when even those who are paid to believe lose faith? And this is the moment to put these two countries side by side, not to compare, but to understand why in the same crisis, one side rises while the other falls apart. The similarities between Burkina Faso and Kenya are clear. Both are suffering from public debt, rising living costs, and a loss of public confidence. But the responses of their governments are as different as night and day. In Burkina Faso, when faced with a budget shortfall, Ibrahim Traoré did not resort to IMF-style austerity. Instead, he chose to engage directly with the people, inviting civil society groups, village chiefs, students, women, and even small traders to participate in a national forum to discuss a self-sustaining economic model. Traoré asked questions rather than gave orders. If you were president, what would be the first thing you would cut to protect food and schools? This approach not only created consensus but also increased the public sense of responsibility. People began donating land, contributing labor to build infrastructure, and protecting power stations from vandalism. In Kenya, by contrast, the government immediately implemented the IMF's emergency reform recommendations: cuts in civil service salaries, increases in consumption taxes, deferrals in salary payments, no public consultation, no dialogue, just orders, and security forces to maintain order. The result, the security forces who were directly affected by this policy were the first to protest. People saw the police being treated as extras and they understood that if the police were strangled, who would stand up for them? One side leads with transparency and calls for collective action. The other side uses imposed policies and hopes that the people will endure long enough. These are two ways to resolve a crisis. One to inspire confidence, the other to extinguish hope. If you were the head of the country, which way would you choose? To overcome the crisis, hide behind policies, or come out and face the people? But the difference is not just in policy. It is in the leaders, in how they define service and power. When a country is in crisis, people don't look to policies. They look to people. They don't read IMF documents. They look into the eyes of the leaders and ask themselves, is this person for me? And on that question, Ibrahim Traoré won. Without campaigning. Across Burkina Faso, his image doesn't appear on giant billboards or expensive LED screens. But in every village, every town hall, every handwritten note of his speech, the message is clear. I am not a savior. I am just the first to tell the truth. Traoré doesn't promise to save the entire economy in a year, but he spells out the steps: land transparency, returning resources to communities, educating youth through vocational programs. He empowers, not seizes. Meanwhile, in Kenya and many other African countries, people are witnessing a familiar pattern. The leader stands aloof, speaks from his palace, has no dialogue, no emotion. And when the crisis comes, people do not know who to turn to, because they do not know who their leader is, other than a strange image on television. The biggest difference between these two models is not policy, but the level of personal trust that people have in their leader. Traoré, through his simplicity, steadfastness, and fearlessness in saying no, has created a form of the political asset that cannot be bought. Natural trust. In a world of political calculation, is there still room for a leader who uses only truth and dignity to lead his people? Do you still believe that an ordinary person, not a billionaire, not the son of a rich man, can become the one to change an entire nation? But then, just as confidence was rising and protests were spreading, an unexpected event happened, turning everything upside down. A twist that no one could have predicted. When looking at the protests in Kenya and the volunteer movement in Burkina Faso, there is a striking similarity. Both are signs of an African awakening, albeit in different directions. In Kenya, the cries of enough from the police quickly spread to civil society. Students, nurses, teachers all began to share their anger on social media and in public squares. But what is remarkable here is that this is no longer a random anger. It is organized, has a message, and is specifically aimed at the dependent development model that the country has pursued for decades. Anger is not about poverty but about poverty caused by the wrong choices of its leaders. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, a counter-movement is taking place. Not protest, but activism. Young people organize technical groups to repair agricultural machinery. Women form associations to produce bread to replace imports. Students tutor rural children via radio. These are not activities required by the state. They are the natural reactions of people when they feel they are part of the solution. The difference is when people believe in the national goal, they will actively build it. When they doubt the legitimacy of the system, they will take to the streets to destroy it. Which do you think makes for a more lasting revolution? Angry resistance or awakening from responsibility? If your government asked you to take on the country today, would you be ready? But where does the real motivation lie? Is it economics, education, or something more abstract? Faith? Let's dive deeper in the next section. In Burkina Faso, something strange has happened in the past 6 months. The government has not launched a national campaign, but society has organized itself like a recovery machine. In the Kaya region, farmers who abandoned their fields due to lack of fertilizer are now farming with homemade biofertilizers. In Bobulaso, architecture students have formed a team to design low-cost housing. From pressed clay, no imported concrete needed. And in Ouagadougou, people are cleaning, planting trees, and renovating schools without any state funding. No banners are hung, no bonuses. Only one thing motivates them: the belief that the country truly belongs to them and that their leaders are listening. Meanwhile, in Kenya, after a wave of resistance from the police, the wave of discontent has spread to education, health, and transport facilities. Civil society groups have started financial justice commissions where they analyze the country's loans, access IMF loan agreements, and publicly question ministers on social media. What does this show? People in both countries are waking up, but in different ways. In Burkina Faso, the awakening is constructive. In Kenya, the awakening is anger and questioning. Traoré did not create a short-term wave. He set in motion a long-term pattern where people no longer wait for the government to act, but act themselves because they know the government will not stop them. It is something that many other countries are following. Mali, Niger, Chad, even Ghana, where Traoré's story is shared on radio, Facebook, village meetings. Do you believe that the country can change itself not with money but with faith? If you were a citizen of such a country, what would be the first thing you would do to help revive the country? But when people started to believe, other forces started to feel afraid. And then an unexpected event happened when the world began talking about the Traoré phenomenon. No one expected that the silent war had begun. But it was not with guns and bullets. It began in financial conferences in Paris, Brussels, and Washington. Just 2 weeks after Traoré announced the expansion of the land reform program and called for agricultural autonomy, a series of Western media outlets simultaneously reported Burkina Faso enters a period of instability. Lack of investment puts the West African country at risk of crisis. Then came the turn of international credit rating agencies to downgrade Burkina Faso. Despite the fact that the country's economy showed no signs of default, foreign investment was withdrawn. Domestic banks were blocked from international transactions. It was a blow not with bullets but with numbers. While the people of Burkina Faso were building brick by brick, the financial world was tearing down credit lines one by one. And then the twist happened. The country's universities were suddenly stripped of funding from a number of international educational organizations. The reason given was that Burkina Faso's academic model is no longer up to global standards. But the people knew it well. That was the world's way of extinguishing independent thinking right from the school bench. If they couldn't control the government, they would control the thinking of the next generation. But the most surprising thing was yet to come, because it was in that darkness that the fire began to burn. In the face of the funding cuts, something unexpected happened. Lecturers, students, and even citizens stepped up to fund education themselves. At the University of UA, engineering students started a self-supporting engineering program where seniors taught freshmen for free. In Koudougou, farmers set up weekend schools to teach their children farming, agricultural, accounting, and local market management, not using imported textbooks but using local experience. The government did not initiate or fund, but it did not stop it either. And so for the first time, education became a social movement, independent of the budget. And in Kenya, when people learned about this term from Burkina Faso, youth forums began to discuss a new concept. The right to education is not a privilege. It is the most silent and profound protest. They no longer need to shout enough. They start asking if Burkina Faso can't teach itself. Why do we keep waiting for scholarships from abroad? And that is the biggest twist. It is not the police taking to the streets. It is not the collapse of the government. It is education, once a tool of oppression, that has become a weapon of awakening. Do you believe that the blackboard and a few pieces of chalk can be more powerful than $1 billion bailout? If tomorrow your child asks, can we teach ourselves without anyone? How will you answer? And in that new light, a question resonates in the heart of the continent. Are faith, education, and self-respect strong enough to keep the flag of independence alive in Burkina Faso? Today, people don't need orders to rebuild their country. In Kenya, police don't need slogans to speak their minds. And in Africa, a land once considered in need of saving, faith is emerging from the simplest things: lessons, notebooks, and trust. The word may continue to dictate, the rankings may continue to criticize, but that doesn't matter anymore. Because when a mother teaches her child to love their country, when a student shares knowledge instead of keeping it to himself, that is the miracle of our time. They say God gives every nation a moment of awakening. Perhaps we are living in that moment. If you were TR, what would you choose to pass on to the next generation? If you were the one who wrote a new history, where would you start? Leave one thing you would do for yourself and for Africa in the comments below.